Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage. Simon Bullock stood on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the Mediterranean, watching the sunrise paint Tel Aviv's skyline in shades of amber and gold. At 35, he had built an empire from nothing, a private security firm that protected diplomats, celebrities, and politicians across the Middle East. His tactical expertise, honed during his years in Israeli special forces, had earned him the nickname the Ghost among his peers. He could slip in and out of the most dangerous situations without leaving a trace. But Simon's greatest pride wasn't his wealth or reputation. It was his 8-year-old son, Leo Bullock, whose laughter echoed from the kitchen where he was having breakfast with his nanny, Jessie McLean. "Daddy's home." Leo rushed to hug Simon, nearly knocking him over with enthusiasm. Simon ruffled his son's dark hair, so similar to his own. Leo was everything to him, curious, brilliant, and fearless. The boy had inherited Simon's analytical mind, but possessed a warmth that Simon sometimes struggled with after years of military conditioning. "How was your mission, Dad?" Leo asked, using their private code for Simon's business trips. "Successful, as always." Simon smiled, but his expression darkened slightly as his wife, Kendra Bullock, entered the room. Kendra had once been the most beautiful woman Simon knew, raven-haired, with piercing green eyes and a smile that could stop traffic. They'd met at a diplomatic function 5 years ago, and Simon had fallen hard. But lately, something had changed. She seemed distant, distracted, always whispering phone calls and secret meetings. "You're back early," Kendra said, barely looking up from her phone. "The Jakarta contract finished ahead of schedule," Simon replied, studying his wife's face. "We should celebrate." "I have plans with my father today," she said curtly. "Business matters." Simon's jaw tightened. Wallace Hayden, Kendra's father, was old Tel Aviv money, inherited wealth from real estate and shipping. He'd never approved of Simon, considering him beneath his daughter despite Simon's success. Wallace was a man who believed power came from bloodlines, not merit. After Kendra left, Simon noticed she'd forgotten her phone on the counter. A text message was visible on the screen. "Tonight. Marina Warehouse District. Come alone." The sender was listed as W.H. Wallace Hayden. Simon's instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. That evening, Simon decided to follow his wife. Using skills that had kept him alive in hostile territories, he trailed Kendra's car through Tel Aviv's winding streets. She led him to an abandoned warehouse in the Old Port District, far from the city's gleaming modern facade. Hidden in the shadows, Simon watched as Kendra met with her father and 2 men he didn't recognize, rough-looking characters who definitely weren't part of Wallace's usual social circle. "The inheritance laws are clear," Wallace was saying, his voice carrying in the empty space. "As long as Simon is alive and married to you, he controls everything if something happens to you. But if he's gone," Wallace's voice trailed off meaningfully. "And Leo?" Kendra asked, and Simon's blood ran cold. "Your son will be raised properly with the right influences. The boy has potential, but Simon's common background is already rubbing off on him." Simon had heard enough. His wife and father-in-law were planning something against him, something that involved his son, but he needed to know more before acting. As he prepared to leave, one of the hired men spotted movement in the shadows. "Boss, we've got company." Simon cursed silently. His surveillance position had been compromised. Chapter 2. Shadows and Secrets. Simon had 2 choices: run and lose the element of surprise, or stay and gather more intelligence while risking exposure. The Ghost chose the harder path. He remained hidden, using every trick he'd learned in special forces to become invisible in plain sight. The hired muscle, a scar man named Earl Crane, and his partner, a wiry fellow called Tomas Ferris, swept the warehouse methodically. Simon pressed himself against a concrete pillar, controlling his breathing, heartbeat, and even the sound of his clothes rustling. "Must have been a cat," Earl finally grunted, returning to the group. Simon's relief was short-lived as Wallace continued the conversation. "The accident needs to look authentic," Wallace said, handing Kendra a thick envelope. Earl here specializes in automotive incidents. Very believable, very final. Simon's fists clenched. They weren't just planning to betray him. They were planning to murder him. What about the business? Kendra asked. Simon's security firm is worth millions. That's the beauty of it. Wallace smiled coldly. Israeli inheritance law gives you complete control as his widow. You'll sell the company, and we'll invest the proceeds properly. Clean money, respectable investments. And if Leo asks questions when he's older, children adapt. We'll tell him his father died serving his country. Very heroic, very tragic. Simon felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Information was power, and he needed to understand the full scope of their plan. Over the next hour, he learned that this conspiracy had been months in the planning. Wallace had been feeding Kendra poison about their marriage, convincing her that Simon was beneath her station and that Leo would be better off without his father's corrupting influence. But the most shocking revelation came when Earl produced a dossier on Simon's recent activities. Your husband's been busy, Earl told Kendra. That Jakarta contract? He wasn't just providing security. He stumbled onto something big, a human trafficking ring operating out of Southeast Asia. He's gathered enough evidence to bring down some very powerful people. Simon's blood ran cold. His last mission had indeed uncovered a trafficking network, and he'd been planning to turn his evidence over to Interpol. But somehow his activities had been monitored. That evidence could be worth a fortune to the right buyers, Wallace mused. Or it could get us all killed if the wrong people think we're involved. All the more reason to handle this quickly. Earl said, tomorrow night, after he puts the kid to bed, we'll make it look like a carjacking gone wrong. Happens all the time in Tel Aviv these days. Simon had heard enough. As the group began to disperse, he melted back into the shadows and made his way to his car. His mind was racing with plans and contingencies, but one thing was crystal clear. He had less than 24 hours to protect his son and turn the tables on his would-be murderers. Driving through the empty streets of Tel Aviv, Simon began making calls to trusted contacts. If Wallace and Kendra thought they were dealing with just another wealthy businessman, they were about to learn why people called him the Ghost. Back at the penthouse, Simon found Leo fast asleep and Jesse reading in the living room. The nanny looked up with concern at Mr. Bullock? You look troubled. Is everything all right? Jessie McLean had been with their family for 3 years. She was intelligent, observant, and genuinely cared for Leo. More importantly, Simon's instincts told him she could be trusted. Jessie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, Simon said, sitting across from her. Have you noticed anything strange about Kendra lately? Any unusual phone calls, meetings, changes in behavior? The young woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. She's been different. Cold toward you, impatient with Leo. And there have been men coming to the house when you're away. Business associates, she said, but they didn't look like businessmen. What do they look like? Dangerous, Jessie said quietly. The kind of men who solve problems with violence. Simon nodded grimly. His wife had been using their home to plan his murder. Jessie, I'm going to need your help with something. It might be dangerous, and if you want to leave, I'll understand completely. The young woman straightened her shoulders. Leo's safety comes first. What do you need me to do? Chapter 3, The Killing Ground. The next evening, Simon played his role perfectly. He tucked Leo into bed, read him a story, and kissed him goodnight as if it were any other day. But hidden throughout the penthouse were micro cameras and recording devices, and Simon had taken precautions that would ensure his son's safety regardless of what happened next. Kendra returned from another meeting with friends just after 9 p.m., her green eyes bright with nervous energy. Leo's asleep, Simon told her, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. I thought we might talk. Talk about what? Simon studied his wife's face, searching for any trace of the woman he'd fallen in love with. About us. About Leo. About the future. Kendra's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it quickly. Actually, I'm tired. I think I'll turn in early. Of course you are, Simon murmured, but Kendra was already heading toward their bedroom. Simon waited exactly 30 minutes, then made his move. He slipped out of the penthouse through a service elevator, taking a route he'd scouted earlier. His car was parked 3 blocks away in a location carefully chosen to fit Earl Crane's surveillance pattern. As Simon drove through Tel Aviv's trendy Florentine district, he spotted the tail immediately. A dark sedan keeping perfect distance behind him. Earl was professional, but Simon had been hunted by the best terrorists and assassins in the world. This felt almost insulting. Simon led them on a carefully planned route toward the industrial district where empty warehouses provided plenty of privacy for murder. He parked his car in an alley between 2 abandoned buildings, exactly where Earl would expect a victim to make his final mistake. But Simon Bullock was no victim. As Earl and Tomas approached his car from both sides, weapons drawn, Simon was already gone, vanished like smoke into the maze of shipping containers and construction equipment that littered the area. Where the hell is he? Earl hissed into his radio. Target has left the vehicle, Tomas reported. Initiating search pattern. They were good, but they weren't ghosts. Simon watched from his perch atop a crane as the 2 killers moved through the industrial maze below. He could have eliminated them both within minutes, but that wasn't the plan. Tonight was about gathering proof and protecting Leo. Revenge would come later. Using his phone, Simon recorded Earl's conversation with Wallace Hayden. The target is in the wind, boss. Guy's more slippery than we thought. Find him. Wallace's voice crackled through the radio. Kendra's already playing the worried wife act. We need this finished tonight. Understood. But this Simon guy, he's not your average businessman. He moves like military. He's special forces, you idiot. I told you that. Just get it done. Simon smiled grimly as he recorded every word. But his satisfaction was short-lived as Earl's next transmission made his blood freeze. Change of plans, boss. If we can't get to the father tonight, maybe we grab the kid for leverage. Force him out into the open. Absolutely not, Wallace snapped. Leo is not to be harmed. He's my grandson, for God's sake. Then what do you want us to do? There was a long pause before Wallace answered. Burn down his office building. Make it look like arson. If we can't kill him directly, we'll destroy his business and force him out of the country. Kendra can file for divorce and custody while he's on the run. Simon had heard enough. He had the evidence he needed, and now he had to protect his son and his business. But as he prepared to leave, Tomas appeared directly below him, weapon raised. Got you, you slippery bastard, the killer grinned. The shot echoed through the industrial district, and Simon fell from the crane, landing hard on the concrete below. Earl rushed over to examine the body. Is he dead? Tomas checked for a pulse. Yeah, he's done. Broke his neck in the fall. But as they dragged Simon's apparently lifeless body toward their car, neither man noticed the small pool of blood was already coagulating, or that the corpse was still breathing through a technique learned from a Tibetan monk during a mission in the Himalayas. Earl called Wallace as they loaded Simon into their trunk. Package is ready for delivery, boss. Where do you want us to dump it? The old alley behind the Marina warehouse district. Make sure he's never found. As they drove through the dark streets of Tel Aviv, Simon remained perfectly still in the trunk, his body appearing lifeless while his mind planned every detail of his return from the dead. The ghost was about to become exactly that, and his enemies would learn that some phantoms were far more dangerous than the living. When they dumped his broken body in the alley and drove away, Simon heard Kendra's voice echoing in the distance. Is it done, Dad? Wallace's reply chilled him to the bone. He's trash. No one will find him. Now we take his son, your blood, and the inheritance is all yours. As their footsteps faded, Simon slowly began the agonizing process of setting his own broken bones and standing up. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 4. Rising from the Dead. 3 days passed before Simon was strong enough to move properly. He'd used an abandoned warehouse as his recovery base, treating his injuries with supplies stolen from a veterinary clinic and relying on survival skills that had kept him alive in war zones. His left arm had been broken in 2 places, his ribs were cracked, and his face was a map of bruises and cuts. But Simon Bullock had survived worse. What truly wounded him was the knowledge that his wife, the woman he'd trusted with his heart and his son's future, had orchestrated his murder. Using a burner phone, Simon called Jessie McLean from a number she wouldn't recognize. McLean residence, came her familiar voice. It's me, Simon said simply. Mr. Bullock. Jesse gasped. Thank God you're alive. They said you were killed in a carjacking. Leo's been crying for 3 days straight. Is he safe? For now. Mrs. Bullock and her father have taken control of everything. The funeral's tomorrow, and they've already filed paperwork to claim your assets. But Leo, he refuses to believe you're dead. He keeps saying his daddy promised to always come back. Simon's throat tightened. I need you to do exactly what I tell you, Jesse. Leo's life depends on it. Over the next hour, Simon laid out a complex plan. Jesse would continue working for Kendra while secretly gathering intelligence and keeping Leo safe. She would also help Simon access his hidden resources, offshore accounts, safe houses, and caches of equipment that even Kendra didn't know existed. There's something else, Jesse said. After they announced her death, men came to search her office. They took computers, files, everything. But I overheard Mrs. Bullock on the phone. Something about selling information to people in Jakarta. Simon's jaw clenched. The trafficking evidence he'd gathered wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. If Kendra and Wallace were planning to sell it to the highest bidder, they could be putting hundreds of innocent lives at risk. That night, Simon broke into his own office building through a maintenance shaft. The place had been ransacked, but he wasn't looking for the obvious hiding spots. In the wall behind his personal safe was a second compartment that contained backup drives, false identities, and enough cash to fund a small war. But as he worked, Simon realized he wasn't alone in the building. Security cameras showed 3 men on the ground floor. Not security guards, but professional killers. Wallace was taking no chances that the ghost might return from the dead. Simon smiled grimly as he recognized one of the men. Alfonso Burgess, a notorious assassin who specialized in making people disappear permanently. Wallace was spending serious money to make sure Simon stayed dead. Moving through his own building like a phantom, Simon began to turn the hunters into the hunted. He cut power to the elevators, disabled the main lighting, and activated a security system that only he knew how to operate. Within minutes, the building had become a maze of locked doors, sealed stairwells, and emergency lighting. What the hell is going on? Alfonso's voice echoed through the comm system. Building's gone into lockdown, one of his partners replied. We're trapped. No, Alfonso said slowly. We're being hunted. For the next 2 hours, Simon stalked the 3 killers through his own building. He didn't kill them. That would come later when the time was right. Instead, he gathered intelligence, recorded their conversations, and learned everything he could about Wallace's extended network of criminals and corrupt officials. By dawn, Simon had vanished again, leaving behind 3 unconscious assassins and a building full of evidence that would keep investigators busy for months. But more importantly, he'd confirmed his suspicions. This conspiracy went far beyond a simple murder for inheritance money. Wallace Hayden was connected to the same trafficking network Simon had discovered in Jakarta. The old man wasn't just trying to steal Simon's wealth. He was protecting a criminal empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Chapter 5. Building an Army. Simon's first recruit was someone Wallace would never suspect. Preston Gwynn, a brilliant tech specialist who'd worked for Simon's security firm before being fired for attitude problems. In reality, Preston had been too honest about the corruption he'd discovered in several client organizations. You're supposed to be dead, Preston said when Simon appeared at his apartment door. Death was greatly exaggerated, Simon replied. I need your help, and I can offer you something Wallace Hayden's network destroyed. Justice. Preston's eyes lit up with understanding. What did you have in mind? Over coffee and takeout, Simon laid out the scope of the conspiracy. Wallace wasn't just a corrupt businessman. He was a facilitator for international criminals. His shipping companies provided logistics for human trafficking. His real estate holdings served as safe houses for fugitives, and his political connections protected the entire operation. Kendra knew, Preston said, reviewing the evidence Simon had gathered. She had to know. Some of these transactions required her signature as your wife. Simon nodded grimly. His wife hadn't just betrayed him for money. She'd been complicit in crimes that destroyed innocent lives. So what's the plan? Preston asked. We're going to dismantle their entire network, Simon said. But first, we need more allies. Their next recruit was Dr. Lynette Cowan, a forensic accountant who'd been investigating Wallace's businesses for the Israeli tax authority before being reassigned under mysterious circumstances. She jumped at the chance to finish her work with Simon's resources and protection. The third member of their team was the most unexpected, Earl Crane, the same hired killer who'd supposedly murdered Simon 3 nights earlier. "You've got balls, I'll give you that," Earl said when Simon confronted him in a parking garage. "Coming after the man who killed you." "You didn't kill me," Simon replied calmly. "You just thought you did. Now you have a choice. Keep working for Wallace and end up in prison or dead, or help me bring him down and walk away clean." Earl studied Simon's face, recognizing something he'd seen in special forces operators and career criminals. Absolute certainty of purpose. "What do you know about my situation?" Earl asked. "I know Wallace has leverage on you. Your daughter, Deborah Crane, is in a private hospital in Switzerland. Expensive treatment for a rare blood disorder. Wallace pays the bills in exchange for your services." Earl's face went pale. "How did you? I'm offering you a better deal," Simon continued. "Help me destroy Wallace's network, and I'll make sure Deborah gets the best treatment money can buy. Permanently. And if I refuse?" Simon's smile was cold as winter. "Then you'll discover what happens when you try to kill a ghost." Chapter 6. The First Strike. With his team assembled, Simon launched the first phase of his revenge. It wasn't dramatic or violent. It was methodical, precise, and absolutely devastating to Wallace's criminal empire. Dr. Cowan had discovered that Wallace used a network of shell companies to launder money from the trafficking operation. Every transaction was carefully documented, but the digital trail was hidden behind layers of encryption and false identities. Preston cracked the encryption in 3 days. "It's beautiful," he said, reviewing the financial records. "A perfect map of every crime they've committed for the past 5 years. Bank transfers, real estate purchases, payoffs to officials, everything." "Can you trace it back to specific victims?" Simon asked. "Better than that. I can identify exactly where the money came from and where it went. We've got them dead to rights on trafficking, money laundering, bribery, and conspiracy." But Simon wasn't ready to turn the evidence over to authorities yet. He needed Wallace and Kendra to know they were being hunted by a ghost. The first sign came when Wallace's personal accountant, Juan Patterson, discovered that someone had accessed his most secure files. Nothing was stolen, nothing was damaged, but every document had been copied, and a single message was left behind. "The ghost sees everything." The second sign was more dramatic. Earl Crane appeared at Wallace's office, supposedly to collect payment for Simon's murder, but actually to plant surveillance devices throughout the building. While there, he mentioned that strange things were happening in the criminal underworld. Informants were disappearing, safe houses were being compromised, and someone was systematically destroying the trafficking network's operations across 3 countries. "Could be coincidence," Wallace said, but his voice was tight with concern. "Could be," Earl agreed. "Or it could be someone's hunting your business associates." The third sign shattered Kendra's composure completely. She received a package at her new apartment, the luxury penthouse she'd moved into after inheriting Simon's wealth. Inside was a single photograph, Simon and Leo at the beach last summer, both smiling at the camera. Across the bottom, someone had written, "A father's love never dies." Kendra called her father immediately. "He's alive, Dad." "Simon's alive, and he knows everything." "Impossible," Wallace replied, but he was already activating security protocols throughout his organization. Earl confirmed the kill. "We buried an empty coffin, but the body was definitely there." Then explained the photo. Wallace had no answer, but as he sat in his office, surrounded by bodyguards and security cameras, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him from the shadows. He was right. Simon was there, invisible in plain sight, recording every conversation and documenting every crime. The ghost had returned from the dead, and he was just getting started. Chapter 7. The Sins of the Father. Simon's psychological warfare campaign intensified as he began targeting the key figures in Wallace's network. One by one, the trafficking operation's international contacts found themselves under investigation by local authorities, their communications intercepted, their safe houses raided. But Simon's masterstroke came when he discovered the location of Wallace's most valuable asset, a shipping container yard in Haifa where human cargo was processed before being transported to buyers across Europe and Asia. Working with Earl Crane, who had access to Wallace's operational schedules, Simon orchestrated a rescue operation that saved 47 victims, men, women, and children who'd been kidnapped from their homes and sold into slavery. The raid was perfectly timed to occur while Wallace and Kendra were meeting with their buyers, corrupt businessmen from 6 different countries who'd gathered in Tel Aviv to finalize a massive transaction. Ladies and gentlemen, Simon's voice echoed through the conference room's speaker system as police sirens wailed in the distance. Welcome to Tel Aviv. I trust you're enjoying your stay. Wallace's face went white as he recognized the voice. Impossible. You're dead. Death is just another kind of mission, Wallace. And this one isn't over yet. The room erupted in chaos as the international criminals realized they'd been set up. Security cameras throughout the building showed police surrounding the exits, while helicopters circled overhead. But Simon wasn't finished. As the authorities closed in, he revealed the full scope of his intelligence gathering. Mr. Yamamoto, he said, addressing one of the buyers, I have recordings of you discussing the purchase of 12 children for your brothels in Tokyo. The Japanese National Police are very interested in reviewing that evidence. Mr. Kozlov, your Moscow contacts have already been arrested based on information I provided to Interpol. Your protection racket is finished. One by one, Simon destroyed the carefully constructed anonymity that protected these criminals. Each revelation was backed by documented evidence, financial records, recorded conversations, photographs, and testimony from rescued victims. Kendra watched in horror as her father's empire crumbled in real time. How is this possible? She whispered. Your husband was always smarter than you gave him credit for, Wallace said bitterly. We underestimated the ghost. As police stormed the building, Simon's voice echoed one final time. This is just the beginning. Justice is coming for all of you. Chapter 8. The Father's Love. While Wallace and his international criminal network faced arrest and prosecution, Simon's real target remained free. Kendra had avoided the conference, staying home with Leo, which had saved her from immediate capture but put her in an even more dangerous position. She was alone, terrified, and desperate. That desperation made her dangerous. Simon watched from across the street as Kendra loaded suitcases into her car, clearly planning to flee the country with Leo. His son, his beautiful, innocent boy, was being treated like a piece of property to be claimed and sold. But Simon had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Every exit from the city was monitored, every private airfield watched, every possible escape route covered by his network of allies. When Kendra's car broke down mysteriously on a deserted road outside Tel Aviv, she wasn't surprised to see Simon emerge from the shadows. Her husband, the man she'd tried to murder, approached the vehicle with the calm confidence of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Hello, Kendra, Simon said, opening the passenger door. We need to talk. Leo looked up from his car seat, his young face breaking into pure joy. Daddy, I knew you weren't dead. I knew you'd come back. Simon's heart nearly broke as he embraced his son. Leo felt so small, so fragile, so precious. This child was worth more than all of Wallace's criminal empire combined. I promised I'd always come back to you, Simon whispered. Nothing in this world could keep me away. She said you were gone forever, Leo said, glancing at his mother. She said bad men hurt you. The only bad people were the ones pretending to love us, Simon replied, his eyes never leaving Kendra's face. Kendra had aged years in the past weeks. Her beautiful features were drawn with exhaustion and fear, her green eyes hollow with the knowledge of what she'd done. You destroyed everything, she said quietly. My father, our life, our future. I destroyed a criminal enterprise built on human suffering, Simon corrected. Your father was never just a businessman, Kendra. He was a monster, and you helped him. I didn't know about the trafficking. You knew enough. Simon produced a tablet showing financial records. These are transactions you authorized as my wife. Money transfers to shell companies, real estate purchases for safe houses, payments to assassins. You weren't just Wallace's daughter. You were his business partner. Kendra's composure finally cracked. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I just wanted Leo to have a better life, a respectable family, proper connections. You wanted him to have blood money, Simon said coldly. You were willing to kill his father and steal his inheritance to give him a better life. I loved you, Kendra screamed. But you were never enough. Never sophisticated enough. Never connected enough, never. Never criminal enough, Simon finished. That was always the problem, wasn't it? I actually earned my success, honestly. Chapter 9. Justice Served. The final confrontation took place not in some dramatic location, but in a quiet courthouse in Tel Aviv where justice moved with methodical precision. Wallace Hayden sat in the defendant's chair, his expensive suit unable to disguise the broken man beneath. Months of prosecution had revealed the full scope of his crimes. Human trafficking, money laundering, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and dozens of other charges. The evidence Simon had gathered was overwhelming. Preston Wynn's digital forensics had created an unbreakable chain of documentation. Dr. Cowan's financial analysis had exposed every hidden asset and criminal transaction. Earl Crane's testimony had detailed the murder conspiracy from the inside. But the most damaging evidence came from the victims themselves. 47 people whose lives had been saved when Simon exposed the trafficking operation. Their testimony painted a picture of systematic cruelty that left even experienced prosecutors shaken. Mr. Hayden, the judge said, "You have been found guilty on all counts. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Wallace's eyes found Simon in the gallery, and for a moment, the mask of civilized respectability slipped completely. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You've destroyed your own family. Leo will grow up knowing his mother is in prison because of you. Leo will grow up knowing his father protected him from monsters," Simon replied calmly. "That's a lesson worth learning." Kendra's trial was shorter, but no less decisive. Her cooperation with authorities had earned her a reduced sentence, 15 years for conspiracy and accessory charges. She'd avoided the death penalty by testifying against her father's network, but she would spend Leo's childhood behind bars. As she was led away in handcuffs, Kendra looked back at Simon one final time. "I did love you," she whispered. "That was real." "I know," Simon replied. "That's what makes this so tragic." But the real victory came later, in a small restaurant where Simon sat with Leo, Jesse McLean, and the team that had helped him bring down Wallace's criminal empire. "So what happens now?" Preston asked. "Now we rebuild," Simon said, watching Leo draw pictures of superheroes on napkins. "The security firm is gone, but there are other ways to protect people, other ways to fight monsters." Dr. Cowan had already accepted a position heading Simon's new foundation, an organization dedicated to combating human trafficking and supporting victims of organized crime. Preston was developing new technologies to help law enforcement track criminal networks across international boundaries. Earl Crane, his daughter's medical bills now paid for life, had retired from violence entirely and was training to become a counselor for at-risk youth. "What about Leo?" Jesse asked quietly. Simon smiled, watching his son's animated explanation of why Batman was better than Superman. "Leo's going to grow up knowing that when bad people try to hurt good people, there are heroes willing to fight back. He's going to learn that justice isn't just something that happens in comic books. And if he asks about his mother, I'll tell him the truth," Simon said. "That people make choices, and choices have consequences. That love without honor is just another kind of prison. And that no matter what happens, his father will always come back for him." 6 months later, Simon stood in his new apartment, smaller than the penthouse, but filled with laughter and warmth instead of secrets and lies. Leo was adjusting well to their new life, though he still had nightmares sometimes. Jesse had officially become his legal guardian as well as nanny, providing the stable maternal influence Leo needed. The international prosecutions were ongoing, but Simon's evidence had already resulted in hundreds of arrests and the rescue of thousands of trafficking victims. The ghost had become a legend in law enforcement circles, the operative who'd single-handedly destroyed one of the world's largest criminal networks. But to Leo, he was just Dad. "Tell me the story again," Leo said as Simon tucked him into bed. "Which story?" "The one about the ghost who came back to save his son." Simon smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. "Once upon a time, there was a father who loved his son more than anything in the world. When bad people tried to hurt them, the father became a ghost so he could protect his family from the shadows." As he told their story, Simon reflected on the price of justice. He'd lost his wife, his fortune, and his old life. But he'd gained something far more valuable: his son's future, free from the corruption and violence that had poisoned previous generations. The ghost of Tel Aviv had completed his mission. The man named Simon Bullock was ready to begin the next chapter of his life. Outside, the Mediterranean breeze carried the sound of laughter and hope through the streets of a city where justice had finally been served. Epilogue. 10 years later. Tel Aviv, present day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training facility as Simon Bullock watched his 18-year-old son demonstrate combat techniques to a group of younger students. Leo had grown tall and lean like his father, with the same analytical eyes and natural grace of movement. But there was something else there too, a warmth and openness that Simon sometimes envied. "Remember," Leo was telling a nervous 12-year-old girl, "the goal isn't to hurt anyone. It's to get away safely and get help. Violence is always the last option, not the first." Simon smiled from the observation deck. His son had internalized the lessons that had taken Simon years to learn through bitter experience. The Bullock Foundation's headquarters occupied a converted warehouse in Tel Aviv's revitalized port district, not far from where Simon had once been left for dead. The irony wasn't lost on him. From the ashes of that alley had risen one of the world's most effective anti-trafficking organizations. "Admiring your handiwork." Dr. Lynette Cowan joined Simon at the window, her hair now silver, but her eyes still sharp as ever. As the Foundation's director of operations, she'd overseen the rescue of over 3,000 victims across 15 countries. "He's better than I ever was," Simon said, watching Leo help the young girl perfect her defensive stance. "More patient, more understanding. He sees possibilities where I used to see only threats." "That's what happens when a child grows up knowing he's loved unconditionally," Lynette observed, "instead of having to earn affection through strength or achievement." The observation stung because it was true. Simon's own childhood had been marked by absent parents and the constant need to prove himself worthy of attention. Leo had never doubted his father's love, even during the darkest periods of their story. Through the glass, Simon watched Jessie McLean, now Dr. Jessica McLean, with a doctorate in child psychology, leading a therapy session for recently rescued trafficking victims. She'd become far more than Leo's caregiver over the years. She was the steady maternal presence that had helped heal the wounds left by Kendra's betrayal. At 28, Jessie had officially adopted the title that everyone had been using informally for years: Leo's mother. The paperwork had been finalized 3 years ago in a quiet ceremony that meant more to Simon than his original wedding ever had. "The Jakarta team is reporting success," Preston Wynn said, approaching with a tablet full of data. Now 35 and bearing the calm confidence of someone who'd found his true calling, Preston had become the Foundation's chief technology officer. His digital forensics work had helped law enforcement agencies worldwide modernize their approach to tracking international criminals. "How many?" Simon asked. 47 rescued from 3 different locations. "The network we've been tracking for 8 months is completely dismantled." Simon nodded with grim satisfaction. The numbers always mattered. Each life saved was a victory against the darkness that still existed in the world. But he'd learned to celebrate these wins without losing sight of how much work remained. "Any connection to the old network?" Lynette asked. "Indirect," Preston replied. "This group was trying to fill the void left when we took down Wallace's operation. They made the mistake of using some of the same financial channels." The mention of Wallace Hayden no longer carried the emotional charge it once had. Simon's former father-in-law had died in prison 5 years ago, officially from a heart attack, but more likely from the accumulated stress of watching his criminal empire systematically destroyed. His death had made headlines in Israel's business newspapers, but Simon had felt only a hollow sense of completion. The real closure had come earlier, during one of Wallace's final appeals hearings. "I want to see him," Leo had said on his 16th birthday. "Not because I forgive him or anything. I just need to understand." Simon had wrestled with the request for weeks. Leo's therapist, not Jesse, but an independent counselor they'd worked with since the beginning, had supported the idea as part of Leo's process of making sense of his family history. The meeting had taken place in a sterile prison conference room, with Wallace in shackles and Leo sitting across from him with the composure of someone far older than his years. "You killed children," Leo had said simply. "You sold people like they were objects. And you tried to murder my father because he was going to stop you." Wallace, looking far older than his years and wearing a prison jumpsuit instead of his expensive suits, had tried to summon some vestige of grandfatherly authority. "You don't understand the complexities. I understand that you chose to hurt people for money," Leo had interrupted. "And I understand that my father chose to save people instead. That's not complex. That's just the difference between good and evil." Simon had watched his son deliver that judgment with pride and sadness in equal measure. Pride in Leo's moral clarity, sadness that the boy had been forced to develop such understanding of human cruelty at such a young age. Wallace had died without ever expressing genuine remorse for his crimes. His final words to reporters had been complaints about the conditions of his imprisonment and claims that he'd been a victim of his son-in-law's vindictive persecution. Kendra's story had followed a different trajectory. She'd been released from prison 6 months ago after serving 9 years of her 15-year sentence. Good behavior and continued cooperation with international investigations had earned her early parole, but the world she'd returned to was vastly different from the one she'd left behind. Her father's vast fortune had been liquidated to pay restitution to trafficking victims. The family's social connections had evaporated as the scope of their crimes became public. The luxury apartments and country estates had been sold, their contents auctioned to fund victim support programs. Kendra now lived in a small apartment in Haifa, working as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization that provided services to ex-convicts. It was honest work that paid enough for basic needs and nothing more. She'd requested to see Leo exactly once since her release. The meeting had taken place at a neutral location, a small cafe in Jerusalem where Simon could observe from a distance while Leo decided how much contact, if any, he wanted with his biological mother. Simon had watched through the window as Leo, now a young man of 18, sat across from the woman who'd given birth to him and tried to have his father murdered. The conversation had lasted exactly 23 minutes. Afterward, Leo had walked to Simon's car with the same calm composure he'd shown in the prison years earlier. "What did she say?" Simon had asked. That she was sorry, that she'd made terrible mistakes, that she hoped I could forgive her someday. Leo had stared out the window at Jerusalem's ancient stones. "I told her I hoped so too, but that forgiveness was something that had to be earned over time. And that even if I forgave her someday, it wouldn't change what happened or bring back the people who died because of her choices." "How do you feel about seeing her?" "Sad," Leo had said simply. "Not angry anymore, just sad. She looks so small now, so broken. It's hard to believe she was ever powerful enough to hurt anyone." That had been 6 months ago. Leo hadn't requested another meeting, and Kendra hadn't asked for one. Sometimes closure wasn't dramatic reconciliation or explosive confrontation. Sometimes it was just two people acknowledging the unbridgeable distance between them and walking away. "Dad!" Leo's voice brought Simon back to the present. His son had finished the training session and climbed to the observation deck. "The new students are asking about the summer program. Are we still planning the wilderness training course?" "If you want to," Simon replied. "It's your program to design." Leo had been accepted to 3 different universities with full scholarships, but he'd chosen to defer enrollment for a year to work with the foundation. His stated goal was to understand the organization's mission from the ground up before deciding whether to study international law, psychology, or computer science. Simon suspected the real reason was simpler, Leo wasn't ready to leave the work that gave his life meaning. At 18, he'd already participated in rescue operations across 3 continents and had personally counseled dozens of young trafficking survivors. University could wait. I was thinking we could partner with Earl's program, Leo said. His kids could really benefit from some outdoor confidence building. Earl Crane now ran a community center in Tel Aviv's roughest neighborhood, providing mentorship and support to at-risk youth. His transformation from hired killer to community leader had been one of the most remarkable aspects of the entire story. His daughter Deborah, now healthy and in her early 20s, worked alongside him as a social worker. That's a good idea, Simon agreed. Earl's kids and our survivors have more in common than either group might realize. Both populations had experienced trauma, powerlessness, and betrayal by adults who should have protected them. Both needed to rebuild their sense of agency and self-worth. As afternoon faded to evening, the foundation staff began wrapping up their daily activities. Simon made his usual rounds, checking in with different departments and reviewing operational reports. The organization now employed over 200 people across 12 countries, with an annual budget that rivaled some small nations' defense spending. But the real measure of success wasn't in budgets or staff numbers. It was in the faces of survivors who'd reclaimed their lives, in the families reunited after years of separation, in the criminal networks disrupted before they could claim new victims. At home that evening, Simon sat on his apartment balcony overlooking the Mediterranean, reading while Leo studied for his university entrance exams at the kitchen table. Jessie was grading papers from the graduate psychology courses she taught at Tel Aviv University. It was a quiet domestic scene that would have seemed impossible during those dark days 10 years ago when Simon had been fighting for his life in an abandoned alley. "Dad," Leo said, looking up from his textbooks. "I've been thinking about Mom." Simon's chest tightened slightly. They'd always been honest with each other about Kendra, but these conversations were never easy. "What about her? I was wondering if you ever regret it. The whole thing, I mean. The investigation, the prosecutions, everything that happened to her." Simon considered the question carefully. It wasn't the first time Leo had asked, and probably wouldn't be the last. "I regret that she made the choices she did," Simon said finally. "I regret that you had to grow up without a mother who deserved you. I regret that so many people were hurt by her father's crimes. But do you regret stopping them?" "Never," Simon said firmly. "Not for a single moment." Leo nodded and returned to his studies. But a few minutes later, he spoke again. "I'm proud of what we do. The foundation, the rescues, all of it. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if things had been different. If she'd chosen differently." Simon closed his book and looked at his son. This remarkable young man who'd grown up in the shadow of terrible events, but had somehow emerged stronger and more compassionate than seemed possible. "If things had been different, you might have grown up in luxury, but never known your own strength," Simon said. "You might have had an easier childhood, but never understood the difference between right and wrong. You might have inherited wealth instead of purpose. And the thousands of people we've helped would still be waiting for someone to care enough to find them." Leo smiled, that warm, genuine expression that reminded Simon of the best parts of his younger self. "Then I guess things happened exactly the way they needed to," Leo said. Later that night, after Leo and Jessie had gone to bed, Simon stood again on his balcony looking out at the lights of Tel Aviv. The city sprawled before him, millions of lives intersecting in patterns too complex to fully understand. Somewhere in those lights were survivors rebuilding their lives with the Foundation's help. Somewhere were law enforcement officers using Preston's technology to track new criminal networks. Somewhere were young people learning from Earl that their past mistakes didn't have to define their future. And somewhere, in a small apartment in Haifa, Kendra was probably lying awake thinking about the choices that had led her to this lonely exile. Simon felt no satisfaction in her punishment, but no regret either. Justice wasn't always about revenge or redemption. Sometimes it was simply about consequences, about ensuring that terrible choices led to appropriate outcomes. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from their team in Bangkok. Package delivered safely. 17 souls heading home. 17 more lives saved. 17 more families reunited. 17 more reasons why the work continued to matter. Simon typed back a simple reply. Well done. The ghost approves. He'd stopped using that code name years ago in official communications, but tonight it felt appropriate. The ghost of Tel Aviv had been born from betrayal and violence, but had evolved into something larger, a symbol that even in the darkest places, someone was watching, someone was fighting, someone remembered that every life had value. As he prepared for bed, Simon reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd lost a wife, but gained a true family. He'd lost his fortune, but found his purpose. He'd been left for dead, but had used that apparent death to bring life to thousands of others. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victims to find, new criminals to stop. The work was never finished, the battle never completely won. But tonight, in a quiet apartment overlooking the Mediterranean, a father and son who'd survived the worst humanity could offer were planning to make tomorrow a little brighter for someone else. That was enough. That was everything. The ghost of Tel Aviv slept peacefully, knowing that justice had been served.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.